Matt Dix, you are a Grand Slam all-time champion storyteller, writer, and business coach. And today we're here to talk about your book, Story Sales, Story-Worthy Strategies to Grow Your Business and Brand. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be back.
So yes, it's an honor to be back. So we had a conversation, I don't know, maybe about a year and a half ago. I don't remember, and I'm sure some of my listeners don't remember either. So can you give us the short version of who you are?
Sure. Unfortunately, there isn't a very short version, but I will say
I read your book.
it's a challenging question for me. During the day, I'm an elementary school teacher. I've been doing that job for 25 years. When I am not teaching and I'm not being a husband and a father and a cat owner, I am an author. So I write novels and books of nonfiction, like this one is today, Story Sell. I'm also a business coach. So I work with everyone from Fortune 100 companies to religious institutions to the FBI to nonprofits, helping them tell better stories. I also perform on stages as a storyteller and a public speaker and a stand-up. I have a wedding DJ business on the side. I play golf very poorly. I do a bunch of things, but mostly I like to say I deal in sentences, whether I'm writing them on the page or speaking them on the stage or helping other people craft their sentences better. That's sort of what I do.
Okay, well, this question is unrelated to the book, but how do you deal with time management? And I tell you why. I think I have a lot of hyphens in my life as well. But my mental energy can only focus on one, and then by the time I get done with this one, I'm just too tired to do the other hyphens in my life. And it's a big struggle because all the facets in my life that I do, they are interesting. I just don't have, I don't know, either the discipline or the stamina to keep on doing. So you are doing all these things. What's the secret?
Well, it's the question I get asked the most. I actually wrote a book about it called Someday is Today. It is the way I answer that question because basically I could spend 18 hours with you and go through all of my processes that allow me to accomplish what I do. But nobody wants 18 hours, which is why I wrote the book. But basically, you know, I sort of value time in a real meaningful way. One of my favorite questions I ask people is the number 1,440. It's a number that no one understands the context of. They don't know what it means. And it's the number of minutes there are in a day. We always think about our days in 24-hour increments, which essentially means you've divided your day into 24 blocks in which you can accomplish goals. But when you start thinking about minutes, 1,440 minutes, suddenly you find that you have a lot more time to accomplish things when you don't restrict yourself to those larger blocks. So you and I are on a Zoom call right now recording this interview. You know that when I clicked on that Zoom call initially, the link failed because my publicist set up the link and it was no good. So I sent you an email telling you the link is no good. And then for about 2 minutes, I waited for you to respond. In the 2 minutes that you were away, I answered an email and then I went to my to-do list and I checked off 2 things that I accomplished this morning. So I valued the time that I knew it would take for you to respond to the email by accomplishing something. And if we look at our time in that way and we start to think about what we can get done in 1 minute, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, suddenly we have a lot more time to do things through the day rather than, I think what most people do is they look at the clock and they say, it's 9:53. I can't really do anything until my 10 o'clock meeting. So I'll just stare at my phone, eat some raisins, wander around and accomplish nothing. Whereas I go, oh, I got 7 minutes. And in my head, I already have things that I can do in 7 minutes and in 3 minutes and in 4 minutes. So starting to think like that can be really helpful. But that is one of a multitude of strategies that I've developed over time to be able to do the things I do. But I will say, I'm not a unicorn. I'm not special in any way. I've just developed systems and habits that help me get through that, which is why I wrote that book.
Yes, and now I remember this is the thing about reading books. When you read a book, it makes sense. And I tell myself, what a great idea. I'm going to implement this in my life. And maybe I do for a day or 2 or 3, and then life begins to happen again. And yeah, okay, so that's a great reminder. I had to reread your book. But now let's go back into the topic of storytelling. Let's start by the basics. What is actually storytelling, and then maybe how can storytelling be applied to business?
Sure. So the tricky thing about stories is that most people don't understand what a story is. They often think that they're going to report on the events that took place over a certain period of time, and that will constitute a story. When really that's not a story. That really is just reporting on events, which no one ever wants, right? That's why we have spouses and mothers. They want us to report on our day, but nobody else really wants that because that's boring. A story is essentially about change over time. I used to be one person and now I'm a different kind of person. I used to think one thing, now I think a new thing. We used to not have a product and now we have a product. We used to have a product, but now we've improved that product, those kinds of things. That's what a story is. It has to have a beginning and an end that are in opposition to each other. So the beginning and the end should essentially contrast with each other. In business, we can start using stories in a multitude of ways, but what we must do is we must use stories because when we tell someone a story, the science behind the brain is fascinating. As soon as I begin telling you a story, I can change your brain chemistry in really powerful ways that can serve me very well. It causes you to like me, causes you to feel better about the world, and improves cognition just by hearing a story that's evolutionarily based because for most of human existence, we couldn't write anything down. And so the only way we transferred knowledge from one generation to the next was by telling stories. So our brains are adapted to when we hear a story, we recognize this might keep us alive. Now, in business, it's not going to keep us alive, but it might keep our business alive. So, what we want to do is be looking for those opportunities to talk about change over time in our business or applying metaphorical stories to the business that we're doing so that people can understand better what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, well, this weekend I went to a house party and it was a mess. People were telling stories that were unrelated one from the other one. And next to me was sitting a very shy Russian guy. And he was so shy, he didn't open his mouth for the whole evening. In fact, at a given moment, he opened his mouth to say, I'm sorry, I have to go. So I found that there are many people who are afraid to contribute a story. And then when they do that, they manage to have that courage, they had to break through the noise and try to fight to keep people's attention because people throw them all kind of random, oh yeah, you did this, I did this better. So first of all, how do we break the fear to contribute our own story either in a social gathering or in a business environment? And then how do we maintain people's attention?
So we break that fear simply by getting in the habit and by believing that the story we have to tell is going to be a good one. So understanding how to tell a story is really going to help us enormously. You know, ideally, in the situation that you described, someone with some empathy would have eventually turned to that person and said, so what do you think about this? Which is something that I do all the time. I'm encouraging people to tell stories. So if we all do that and we all actually develop a level of curiosity about the people around us and an understanding that when people talk to us and share their story, it's actually going to be very beneficial to us. We'll understand them better. We might actually find that we have things in common. We can do business with them. I can find a new golfing partner. All of these things can happen when you allow people to share. In terms of getting people's attention, though, you know, the trick that I teach people first in storytelling is getting people's attention immediately. I think the beginning of a story is the most important part of a story because that's the part where people are going to close their mouths and listen to you or not. You might have something really meaningful to say and you might land in a really beautiful place, but if no one actually went on the journey with you, you will land in that place all by yourself. So the simplest thing people can do, the sort of the thing they can take away today and begin doing for the rest of their lives is simply open every story that you're ever going to tell with two things, location and action, meaning you're going to start your story by saying, I'm in a place and I'm doing a thing. I'm walking down a hall and I'm heading towards the office. As soon as you do that, the brain gets triggered in a real scientific way. When you say, I'm walking down the hallway heading to the office where I need to meet a lady, people's imagination is activated because now you can see a hallway and you can see an office and you can see a lady. And as soon as imagination is activated, people stop talking. It's also a signal to the brain that this is not exposition. This is not listing features. This is not reporting. This is actually a story. And the brain really will tell the person, shut up. This might keep us alive. Now, you need to maintain attention throughout the story and prevent people from sort of interrupting you. But the thing that I've been told by so many of my clients, and especially clients who have a hard time getting a word in edgewise, which is people of color, women, people for whom English isn't their first language, they have reported back to me that when they start with location, I'm in a place, and action, meaning I'm doing a thing, that is the best way to silence a room and at least get people to start listening to you. And then if you have a good story to tell and you have some of my other strategies, you're probably going to be able to get that story out in a meaningful way.
Well, thank you for those comments. But I went to a club called Toastmasters International for many
Yes.
years, 4 years. And the way we were taught to tell a story, and this is the standard that many organizations use, is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So it begins totally different, like setting up the scene, and then begin, oh, I'm going to talk about this, and that, etc., which I myself find boring. But this is the standard storytelling that everybody else tell us. So I don't know how you're going to break through your method, which seems counterintuitive and different.
Well, a couple things. One is you're correct, it's boring. When we tell people what we're going to say before we say it, we steal away all suspense, all surprise, all humor, and all the things that make a story great, right? It would be essentially a movie beginning, and it would say this movie is Mission Impossible, and it's Tom Cruise, and by the end of the movie, he's going to kill this guy, and he's going to rescue this person, and he's going to blow up this, and that's going to save the world. Now let's watch it happen, right? That has now ruined the story for us, right? So I agree that that method of storytelling that is advised in Toastmasters and other places is a terrible way to tell a story. The good news is lots and lots of people tell stories that way. So for us, people who actually want to become effective, memorable, impactful storytellers, we get to do things that other people are not doing. And when we do that, we get to stand above everybody else. I always am telling people that what you're trying to do in life, especially in communication, is to sound different than everybody else. You don't want to sound like everybody else because that is the perfect way to be forgotten and to be forgettable. I worked with a vice president of a very large technology company. He was giving a speech at a conference, and he wanted to be funny for the first time in his life. So we worked jokes into his speech. And at the end of the day, I called him and I said, "How did it go?" And he said, "I took all the jokes out of my speech." And I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Because the first three people who spoke weren't funny. So I was afraid to be funny too." And I said, "That's why you should be funny." I said, "What happened is you just became as forgettable as the first three people who spoke. You just joined the field, right? Rather than standing out and being someone who was memorable and impactful, the kind of person who people will talk about the next day because you were different, he chose to be the same." So I love the fact that in the world there's this terrible advice about say what you're going to say and then say it and then say it again. I love that because it allows real storytellers to stand above, to stand out, to be memorable, to be impactful. So if they want to do that, that's great. Boring storytellers are just very useful to outstanding storytellers because it allows us to climb the mountain that so few are willing to climb.
Okay. At the beginning of the book, you tell us how you became a DJ without being actual a DJ. And I have to tell you, there are some similarities between your life and my life because I became a dance teacher without knowing how to dance. So, but when you were sagging when all the people were singing, right? But you were forced into that situation because you were not taught the proper way to do DJ, to have all these fancy lights and the small screen and the 2000 track records. But many people who want to go into a particular field, they learn how to do things the standard way, and it takes maybe years of frustration before they say to themselves, "I'm going to sag while everyone is." Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, how do we break from these patterns? Because if we are interested in any particular field, we are taught the square way to do something, and we have to have maybe some intuitive knowledge that this is not perhaps the best way to do this.
Right. What we have to recognize is we're either going to fight on the same field as everybody else. And in that case, we have to absolutely be the best, or we're going to choose to fight on a different field and not even fight with those other folks in our industry. So when my partner and I became DJs, we knew we didn't have the biggest record collection. We didn't have the best effects. And we actually thought none of that was very useful. We had both been married And we both recognized what we wanted from our DJs, which was not the best mixes you've ever heard and the best light and smoke effects. What we wanted was people who we liked, who we wanted to spend time with, who we trusted, and who would help us on our wedding day whenever we needed it. So, as I say in the book, my partner and I didn't put out any music. We didn't put out any lights. We put out a simple table with an ugly flyer on purpose. Our flyer was uglier than everyone else's because we wanted it to be memorable. And when people came over to us, all we did was tell them stories. We told them stories about our wedding, what we liked and what we didn't like, what we thought DJs should be doing, and what we thought was important and not important. And, we booked 43 weddings before we ever did a wedding. Remote, our slogan in our company used to be someday we're going to do a wedding. But we got 43 couples to agree to allow us to do their wedding, even though we had yet to do a single wedding. And it was simply because they liked us. Because rather than wearing a silver jacket and dancing on top of a table and, beatboxing and mixing and doing all of that, we were just guys who seemed like the kind of people that you might invite to your wedding. But instead of inviting us to your wedding, you're going to pay us to come to your wedding, but we're going to be really helpful to you. And so, again, when you're in an industry, you choose to fight on the territory that has been assigned, and then you have to be the best. And even then, you're still fighting with the masses, or you find another place to fight. And that's sort of the things like storytelling, which is where people tend not to be fighting. And that's where I teach people to fight.
Okay, yes, I happen to agree with you, but there is always a but. And the but here is, how do we deal with things such as the imposter syndrome? Who am I to do this? And how do we deal with things like we need to get permission from the permission giver in order for us to do these things differently as everybody else? I mean, it's mostly like a psychological question of all these barriers, and I see it every time. I have a friend who is a perfect Spanish speaker. I am a Spanish speaker, and she wanted to start giving Spanish lesson online, and she says, I need to have a 3-year degree in order to be able to give a Spanish lesson to someone online who wants to have conversational Spanish. So this is the imposter syndrome. This is getting permission from the permission giver, and somehow you have broken that barrier, but there's a lot of people being held back by that. How do we break from this?
Well, the first thing we have to recognize is there are no permission givers, right? The only permission giver is ourselves. We give ourselves permission, then we get to do it. The thing that I remind myself all the time, and I've discovered this more as I've, moved through business, is that every time I think someone is sort of, attained a spot on the ladder 9 rungs above me, whenever I'm working with the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, I used to sort of go in a little hesitant, thinking, well, this is a really special person. I'm just me, and this person's running Microsoft, right? And then when you get to know the person, you realize, oh, it's just a person. Like imposter syndrome is based upon the idea that these other people are different than you in some significant way. And they're really not. A lot of times they are exactly like you. Sometimes they don't even have as much information as you have. And that's why they're working with you. I recently went to the FBI to teach their hostage negotiation unit how to tell stories. 200 FBI agents in a room, right? And when I walked in, I thought, well, they're FBI agents and they do amazing things and they're relatively courageous in the work they do. But they're also just people, like they're New York Yankees fans and they play pickleball and they watch movies at night. And that's what they were. And so this, if you're feeling imposter syndrome, what you have to recognize is no one else in the world is really very different from you. You just perceive that to be the case. So your friend, for example, who thinks she needs 3 years of education in order to do this, right? There are people who have that education, but I suspect that her Spanish is probably just as good as those other people. And there's going to be some people who say, I'm not going to take a class from someone who doesn't have a degree. But then there's going to be people who want to take classes just from good human beings, like kind human beings, friendly human beings. And maybe your friend can charge a little less than the people who have 3 years of education to start out, right? So like, I don't know, corner the market on, I don't have a degree, but I speak the language, so I'll charge a little less and get those customers. I think that we have to stop thinking about people as being more special than we are. We tend to all just be ordinary human beings who basically do the same thing every day, despite what our titles and our positions might be. Now, I know that's easier said than done, but that's the framework people start to have, that need to start to have.
Well, I told you a minute ago that I was a dance teacher before knowing even how to dance. You know what I had? I am a Latino, and people say, "Oh, you are a Latino, you must be a good dancer." And I took that identity and I exaggerated my Spanish accent, and I was able to have somehow more credibility than the Quebecois who have taken 10 years of dance classes to teach. And of course, over time, I built my self confidence, this and that. But I was coming on from a place of desperation. I really didn't have a job. I had to do something to pay the bills.
Right. Yeah. The same thing with the DJ company. We didn't know how to DJ at all. We didn't know anything about it. We went to a business. We bought the equipment they told us to buy. We practiced using it in the living room, and then we were off doing weddings. Now, I would say that what we did was slightly foolish because we were playing with people's most important days. You know, a wedding day is not a day you want to mess up. And thankfully, we never did. We took the job seriously. Most of the people, though, like your friend who's teaching Spanish lessons or wants to, if she's not good or she fails a customer, she's just wasted an hour of their time and she can give their money back. And there's no harm, no foul. If you're building a nuclear power plant, like you should probably like make sure you know what's going on. There's certain jobs where you need to fit in the box and you need to have the training and you need to be doing things in the way the industry does it. But most of the time, that's not true. Most of the time, the work we do is not life or death. It's not the most important day in someone's life. And we can just give it our best shot. And if it doesn't work, we hand the money back and say, sorry, maybe I'll be better for you next time. It's as simple as that. So dispel with imposter syndrome completely and just chase your dreams. You got to chase your dreams.
Okay, well, Matt, I know we are short on time. I have one last question. Can you tell us more about the concept of homework for life? How can we develop and exercise this skill of storytelling? And what is the homework that we have to do?
Sure. It was a homework assignment I gave to myself years ago when I was trying to find more stories to tell on stages. Being an elementary school teacher, I'm inclined to solve problems by giving homework, and I gave it to myself. So basically, what I decided was every day I was going to reflect on the day, regardless of how interesting or boring that day happened to be. And I was going to choose one moment from that day that I thought was the most story worthy. If I was forced to tell a story about something that happened that day, what would it be? Even if it wasn't something I'd ever tell a story about. And I write it down, not the whole story, because writing down the whole story is crazy. That's a journaler, and I prefer habits rather than chores. So I wrote it down in an Excel spreadsheet, just like across the length of the screen, 4 or 5 sentences that reflected the moment from the day. And my goal was, find a new story a month, maybe. That would be fantastic. What I discovered over time was our lives are filled with stories, more than we could ever imagine. Not just me, everyone in the world. Tens of thousands of people today do homework for life and they report the same results. What happens is we live our lives and things happen to us that are worth sharing. People say things and we see things and we say things and we do things for the first time or the last time or the best time. Lots of things happen over the course of a day that are worth holding on to, remembering, and possibly sharing. But what happens is we walk past those moments and we forget them and we leave them behind. So if you have a kid, right? If you have a child, my daughter's 15, for example, and if someone said, Matt, tell me everything you remember from when Clara was 4 years old. Thankfully, because I was doing homework for life when Clara was 4 years old, I have hundreds of memories from the 4th year of her life. But if you're a parent who isn't doing homework for life and you have a 15-year-old girl and you say, and I ask you, what do you remember from year 4 of her life? You probably remember a dozen things. You've reduced 365 days of your child's life to a handful of memories. And that's why it feels like our children grow up so fast. They're not actually growing up fast. We're just throwing away the memories of their growing up like it's worthless. And we do the same thing to ourselves. When we think time flies, time doesn't actually fly. Simply, we throw our days away. If I asked you how many days from 2021 do you remember? If you're really good, you might remember after some time and maybe consulting your calendar, you might remember 100 days or 100 moments of specificity from that year, which means you've taken 365 days and reduced it to 100 days. And that's why time feels like it flies. For me, I actually find about 7 items per day, 7 moments per day that I record into my homework for life now. And so I am taking 365 and I'm multiplying it by 7, which means, and I'm here to tell you this is absolutely true, time does not go by quickly for me. It goes by slowly. My 15-year-old daughter feels 15. My 12-year-old son feels 12 because I have been noticing, holding on to, recording, and sharing all of these moments through the years. The sooner you do this, the sooner you begin homework for life, the sooner time will slow down. You'll find more things in your life. You'll find like your life has more meaning and you're going to have some more stories to share. That's sort of the quick and dirty outline of homework for life. There's a TED talk on the topic. You can just Google the phrase homework for life and find my TED talk, and you can see me talk about it for about 15 minutes in greater detail. But it is the most important thing that I teach. And it is, I think, the most important thing you can do to sort of see your life in a new and better way.
Wow, what a wonderful concept. Thank you so much, Matt. Well, the last question is, can you tell us one more time the title of the book, where can people buy it, and where can they follow you online or your website or whatever?
Sure. The name of the book is Story Sell, story-worthy strategies to grow your business and brand. They can find me at matthewdix.com. If they want storytelling content, they can go to storyworthy.com, where I have a free academy that they can join and go through lessons on how to tell stories. I've got lots of resources. I have lots of courses. So if they go to storyworthy.com, they can find all that content there. And if they want to find me on social media, it's just Matthew Dix on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all those places. So you can find me there too.
Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.